there's a long-term solution in terms of alternatives to retaliatory tariffs, and that long-term solution is what everybody's talking about, which is get oil on the water, right? And so can you put oil on the water, right, to allow yourselves optionality? Whole key for Canada is if you feel like this is an unstable partnership, if we feel like this is only going to make problems, we need to create that optionality. You create that optionality in general in the oil sector by putting oil on the water, because pipelines means politics. There's no way, almost no way to avoid it. Individuals can try their best to funnel the oil through, get it to the Gulf Coast where it is competitive on the international market, right? Because it won't have a tariff. Yeah. So those are some things you can do. The other one is, I'm a believer that the tariff won't necessarily be paid for by Canadians or by Canada. Particularly in markets where the Canadian oil is heavily incumbent, right? Where you've already got this, and particularly where places like Pad 2, the US Midwest, or the Rockies, where it's dominating the supply. The US Canadian producers have a lot of leverage in the negotiations with the US refiners to say, sorry, you're gonna have to pay that tariff and pass it on to your customers, right? Otherwise, we can't send it to you. And they don't have much of a choice. So, and then of course the US refiner can say, well, you have no option to sell it. They'll meet in the middle somewhere. Exactly where, there's don't know, but I think it's wrong to think of this tariff as completely a burden on the Canadians. Eventually it will be passed on largely, I think, to consumers. If you have retaliatory tariffs, the classical economic answer, which I find difficult to refute, is you pass that on to consumers. Something, you're importing something and it costs more, you pass it on, because the whole point of tariffs is designed to eventually stimulate the home country, whatever the country is, to make that product, okay? So you're not suffering from cheap imports, so quote. But the problem, of course, is that takes time, right? If you're importing milk, or you're importing cars, or you're importing oil, for you to be able to do it, maybe you can't even do it in the case of a natural resource. But otherwise, you have to set up that business, you have to get the equipment in, you have to make things happen, you have to build, and that takes time. In tariff, you can think of actually as an incentive, because prices to consumers are high, to make a competitive product and undercut the competition. Companies need to do two things, I think. Number one is learn to focus on the structures, okay? In the sense of try to sort out the noise from the signal, okay? And figure out what's going to happen. The second one, though, is try to create flexibility and create optionality. And this is interesting because one of the things I do is I'm a strategist. And so, my fault is I'm going to drive off the cliff because I wasn't looking around, right? But I am a strategist. I'm on that end of the spectrum. Trump is on the other end of the spectrum. And there are a lot of businesses I know that are run this way in all countries, which is I'm flexible, I'm a deal doer, right? And so the good parts is you create that adaptability, flexibility, you're opportunistic. The extreme of that is, well, it's chaos, okay? The point I want to make is when you're dealing with someone like that, put on your deal doer hat, yeah? And so creating optionality and treating it as a deal doing environment, okay? And is, I think, probably the way to go to try to cope with these.